There's a lot of buzzword around, the data driven, right? And that gets thrown out a lot these days. That, for organizations needs to be data driven. The decisions need to be data driven, right? So, how would you like explain to our audience, right? Like, what foundational pieces must be in place for an organization to call itself truly data driven?
It's always fascinating for me when I walk into an organization and I ask about their current data execution and plan and how they're actually using data and or AI across the organization. And they'll show you 700 dashboards. How do I help make sure that the organization has the systems, the processes, the capabilities, that they are actually making decisions off of data, or that we are using data to automate processes where possible, etc. I can't tell you how many times I advise on a data strategy and all it talks about is the architecture, right? All it talks about is the product or the capabilities. But I would say 10% of it is having the right technology in place. The other 90% is how are you going to actually help enable the people across the organization?
Welcome to Discover Dialogues podcast, powered by TechDogs. The world of business and technology is evolving at breakneck speed. AI breakthroughs, digital transformation, and game-changing innovations are reshaping industries every day. On this show, we dive into the trends, ideas, and strategies driving the future. We're sitting down with industry leaders, innovators, and disruptors to bring you fresh insights, bold perspectives, and real conversations that matter. So plug in, tune in, and let's discover what's next.
Today on the show, we're joined by Robin Sutara, the Field Chief Data Officer at Databricks, where she guides organizations through the complexities of data transformation, helping them harness the power of AI and data at scale. Not just a tech leader, Robin's passion for diversity in AI and mentoring the next generation of women leaders in data shines through in everything she does. Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of TechDogs Discover Dialogues. Robin, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
So, Robin, before we get into the technicalities of data strategies and leadership advice, I would like to rewind a bit, and so that our audience gets to know your professional journey a bit, because your journey is kind of rare. You started with working with the U.S. Army at the start, and then started working with Microsoft, and now leading the enterprise AI strategy at Databricks, right? So can you let our audience know how this journey has been and how has it shaped you till now?
Yeah, I think people are always amazed, right, that my career actually started in the U.S. Army, working on the weapons and electrical systems of the Apache helicopter. So it is definitely an eclectic career to get into technology and where I am. Um, the interesting part, I think, so I enlisted in the Army essentially like many others do to pay for university. I had started my studies in computer engineering and ran out of funds, so I had to figure out how I was going to pay for that. I had the opportunity to serve in the U.S. Army for almost 3 years in Korea, as well as stateside in several different locations. I think the fascinating part for me was that at that time it was the early 90s, and Microsoft had come out with this product called Excel. Right, they had just started releasing some of the Office suite. Fortunately for me, most of the people I worked with felt like since it was a computer and it was typing, it was a woman's job, and so I had the opportunity to actually really get deep into the Office suite and understand how it worked and the power. Built some of our early databases of tracking in Excel for the Apache helicopters on the weapons and the maintenance records, the parts transitioning, et cetera. And so early times of actually creating databases, but that's when I realized, I think, the power of enterprise computers at that point, right? Because they were still relatively novel. So I told everybody at my duty station I was going to go work for Microsoft, and they sort of thought that was super funny and that would never happen. But that was my objective when I got out. So as I got out of the military, I found a job doing computer hardware repair while I did my MCSE at night. And I was very fortunate that I had the opportunity to land a role at Microsoft, started as a vendor and then transitioned transitioned into full time, doing IE5 support on Windows 3.1 for consumers. So this was essentially people that were trying to use the browser to get to their bank website and couldn't figure out how to make it work. I got to answer all of those phone calls. And like as you mentioned, I then spent the next 2 decades, so 23 years with Microsoft in various roles, some of them technical, some of them business focused. The big ones were probably the Chief Operating Officer of Azure Data Engineering, which is the team that's responsible for everything from SQL Server on-prem to all of the different flavors of Azure data databases, including things like Azure Data Factory for ingestion, Purview for the governance, data warehousing, et cetera. And then I took a role as Chief Data Officer of Microsoft UK. So I had the opportunity to live in London as well as live in the US. And it was while I was in London doing that role that Databricks hired me away. And I have now been with Databricks for about 3 years. In a role that's called the Field Chief Data Officer. And essentially, what that means is that I travel all over the world and I advise our customers and organizations on how they can use Databricks to actually execute against their data strategy. Since we know part of it is technology, but I find that more often it's people, process, change management, operating models, organizational design. So, can I take my experience of helping Microsoft do that internally and actually help our customers be able to leverage Databricks to be able to do that? So, it's a great opportunity, I think, to see what's going well, particularly in today's age of agentic AI, where everyone's trying to innovate as fast as possible. I have a front row seat to see what's working and what's not working, and I'm very fortunate to partner with some fabulous customers to help them be successful.
It's a rare blend of disciplines and experience, and now that we've got to know that, how, your journey has shaped you till now, we would like to, shift some gears and speak about the area that, where you have really made the mark in, right? So what I would like to, because there's a lot of buzzword around, the data driven, right? And that gets thrown out a lot these days, that, for organization needs to be data driven, the decisions need to be data driven, right? So how would you like explain to our audience, right? Like, what foundational pieces must be in place for an organization to call itself truly data driven?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. I think everybody talks about being data driven. It's always fascinating for me when I walk into an organization and I ask about their current data execution and plan and how they're actually using data and or AI across the organization. And they'll show you 700 dashboards, right? And they say, of course we're data driven. We have data everywhere. Like we have more data than we know what to do with. I think one of the really interesting parts, having worked at Microsoft and as we sort of saw their transformation when Satya Nadella came into role, transforming the company from being sort of backward looking into more forward looking. I think one of the things he really did was say, we're going to be a learn it all company as opposed to a know it all company. I'm sure plenty of people have read that quote out of his book, etc. So what that really meant was, at least in the roles that I had for the last half of my career there, was how do I help make sure that the organization has the systems, the processes, the capabilities, that they are actually making decisions off of data, or that we are using data to automate processes where possible, et cetera, as opposed to just exposing all data to everyone so that there's this sort of information overload. How do we make really sure that we're not just delivering the technology that gives people data, but are we thinking about the processes that we can change, the enablement that we can bring people along on their journey to change how they do their role today will be very different to how they do it tomorrow if they're being data led. So some of the organizations I see do this really well are they're actually reevaluating the existing processes to say, if it currently takes 20 people across the company, hundreds of people hours to be able to deliver against this project, where can we actually start to not only automate the things that are relatively mundane tasks, but now how do we make sure that we're enabling those teams to be able to do that function differently? I think a great example is that I've seen this done really, really well is like finance teams. If you think about how much manual work that they've had to do in the past in Excel, et cetera, and they are probably power Excel users compared to anyone else across the company. So how do we think about in a true data-driven world, you're not doing everything singularly all by yourself. You're figuring out how do you take all of that knowledge, that capability, the things that you have built in Excel, and how do we put it in a repeatable place, whether it's via an app, a data product, an AI product, and now expose that to the rest of the organization so that you can actually start to get economies at scale. I think real data-driven companies are doing that. They're thinking about how do we reevaluate the processes and how do we make sure that we are helping the organization scale those in a way that's consumable or can be found, right? They can be discovered and actually consumed by others across the organization. And the other maybe attribute that I will say is that they have some level of leadership articulation of the power of data across the organization. So if I think about those CEOs who stand up on stage and say, I am making this strategic decision for the company because of this data or this insight, the more that you can start to integrate it into those very natural processes of the organization from the top all the way to the bottom and everywhere in between, those to me are really the companies that I would say are demonstrating being data led or data driven.
So where do you see most of the companies stumble upon, when they start on this journey? What are the key bottlenecks that they have?
Yeah, so I think the very first thing is starting with some level of clarity. I think everybody talks about data, everybody talks about AI. I can't think of a single, maybe it's the position I sit in today, right? But I think I cannot think of a single organization that is not thinking about how do they get better data faster so that they can make
Mhm.
decisions. If we look at like the tariffs in the US, every organization is trying to figure out how is that going to impact us? How is that going to change our supply chain processes? How is it going to
Mhm.
change our manufacturing capabilities? There's all sorts of caveats, and that is based on data. And so for many organizations, I think it is really getting super clear on how important data is and having
Mhm.
the modern data capabilities to be able to drive that across the organization. So I think that's the very first thing is making sure that you have a strategy, right, that's giving you sort of that North Star based on the mission and vision that you're looking to accomplish as an organization. I think the other thing they do is think about it from a people process platform point of view. I can't tell you how many
Mhm.
times I advise on a data strategy and all it talks about is the architecture, right? All it talks about is the product or the capabilities. But I would say 10% of it is having the right technology in place. The other 90% is how are you going to actually help enable the people across the organization?
Mhm.
So, how are you thinking about things like change management, things like generative AI, where prompt engineering is an expectation now? Of everybody in every role, but are we really thinking about how we enable people to feel comfortable with that and how it
Mhm.
actually increases productivity as opposed to displaces existing roles? And so I think those organizations that are doing it really well are not treating every employee across their organization exactly the same. They are thinking about if we are truly going to be transformational with this capability and the tech that we have now built, how do
Mhm.
we make sure that we're bringing people along on the journey that's the right thing for them based on the function that they're trying to achieve and they understand the mission and why they sort of need to change as the way. And then I think the third is making sure you have the right technology. I think in today's pace of innovation, it's so funny. I mean, when I started in tech, the mission of Microsoft, for example, was a PC on every desktop. If I were to ask
Mhm.
my 20-year-old kids, like, what's a PC, they would have no idea, right? Like they've never had They've never had a tower with a monitor with them, right, having to wait for their dial-up modem to connect. And so I just think, if you think of the pace of technology, it used to be relatively slow. We used to be able to respond over years
Mhm.
to help an enterprise organization transform with the pace of technology. Today, I think every other week we see a net new model, a net new agentic framework, a net new the right governance capability across every sort of product, and they all sound exactly the same. And
Mhm.
so, how I think about it is, how do we make sure that we're setting up some of those foundations and the platforms to be as future proof as possible? You can't afford to rebuild your entire tech stack every time the technology is evolving now, because you
Mhm.
no longer have 3, 5, 10 years between those technical evolutions. You have weeks. And so, how do you think about building the technical abilities to be able to transform that best?
That's so true. Where you said, like the the pace at what technology is evolving, right? Like the new generations don't even know what PC, CPU, and how
Yeah.
to integrate all the hardware together to ensure that the entire model is working. Right now, everything is like smartphones have become capable of using as laptop. Now you don't even require a laptop or a system to get your work done. And with the evolution of AI, especially generative AI, things are moving at an even faster scale, right? And so there are, and as you said, right, like there are conversations around ethics and governance, right? And I know you're a huge proponent of responsible AI, right? So how do you like, and how do enterprises balance rapid innovation with governance, especially when regulations are also constantly evolving?
So I think there's a couple of aspects to it, but I think the very first thing is, how do you, if you look at existing systems and existing data sets that we have, they are inherently biased, right? Particularly if I think about things like healthcare data, social impact data, et cetera, there are historical biases that exist in the data sets. And so I think the very first thing that I talk to organizations about is, how do you make sure that you have diverse teams that are trying to particularly your data science teams that are trying to
Mhm.
solve for some, or business users that are trying to solve for the business problem that you're looking to drive. Because if your team is not diverse and you're using inherently biased data sets, your results are going to be biased at the other side. And so that's the very first thing, is thinking about it from a people culture point
Mhm.
of view from the very beginning. Are you making sure that your data science team has people from different cultural backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, gender backgrounds, education backgrounds, right? I'm a very non-traditional. I did not grow up in a data science role. I don't have
Mhm.
my PhD in comp sci, and so how could I contribute to some of those business problems that we're looking to solve for, where I could point out potential gaps in the data sets that we're using to create the AI solutions at the other end. Once you have that, I think that diversity of thought, that diversity
Mhm.
of logic and approach to solving some of those business problems, now you can start to think about, how do you make sure you have a platform and the capabilities to build it in a way that is going to help you be future proofed as this regulatory legislative decisions get made, right? So
Mhm.
in the EU, we definitely have the EU AI Act. It's just now being implemented and rolled out, and so it'll be interesting to see how it gets interpreted across organizations. I think UK has come up with a very similar. US is still in a state of ambiguity,
Mhm.
and so, because there is very little federal legislation, lots of states are passing legislation, which organizations that operate across the country have to now comply with every state. But there are a few foundational things that I think most of these regulatory and legislative requirements are looking at. One is end-to-end lineage. Can you identify exactly what data you used? What model did it go into? What outputs did it happen? Can you actually tell which customers were impacted as a result of this AI solution? So I think that transparency and end-to-end lineage are being able to identify the end-to-end lineage from data to data product or AI product at the very end is the first thing. I think the second is sort of transparency. Do we understand what models being used? Do we understand the weighting behind the models? What's the
Mhm.
algorithms and logic that has gone into the application that you have built? Can you actually articulate what has happened there, so that if you do identify bias later, right, you have a way to identify where that happened as part of the agentic chain. I think the other piece is sort of is explainability,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which we just sort of talked about. Once you have that transparency, can you actually explain what happened during all of those stages? So for any organization that is looking at building out these compounded agentic systems, I think if you think about each part of the solution, you're going to have the capability to be able to deliver against that. And so that's why I'm super excited about some of the things that Databricks has built.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'll just do the little plug here because, right, I work for a fabulous company that is thinking about exactly that. If we look at things like Unity Catalog, despite the word catalog, it is actually so much bigger than that. It's really thinking about governance across your data and AI assets. How do I make
Mm-hmm.
sure that I can tell you exactly what tables went into what model and how it's actually feeding through the system, right? And can you monitor for drift off of sort of what your expectations are? Can you have the capability that if a better model comes out that helps you identify that, or that has less of a risk factor in sort of how they're applying the algorithms, can we transition those in and out? So I do think technology can help around it, but the other thing is making sure that we're thinking about the people and process part of it. And maybe the last thing that I'll talk about is every organization needs to have some level of understanding about how much risk are you willing to take, right? Because of all those things that we just talked about, there is an inherent risk to doing those things. So how do we think about some of those use cases or those business value propositions that we can drive that minimize the amount of external risk that we have? So lots of organizations started with things like HR policies. They started with sort of summarization tasks, right? Things that were very much internal to their own organization because they wanted the capability to innovate and experiment with the technology and the capabilities without exposing themselves to external risk for their customers or clients or patients or citizens or whatever it might be that they're trying to serve. And so I think we are now to the point that a lot of that sort of testing and capability building and a competency
Mm-hmm.
improvement has been happening now over the last year, that now organizations are looking at how do we think about how much risk appetite are we willing to take. And the technology, I think, has now gotten better to where organizations can set up some of these guardrails. You can set some rules in place so that you get visibility into how far the application is drifting off of expectations. You have ways to get feedback, et cetera. So I'm super excited for what's to come. I think we'll continue to see improvements in those spaces. But for any organization that is completely risk averse and is saying we're not going to do anything until it's all figured out, I worry for you, right? I worry that you will be left behind. And so there has to be some risk appetite on the part of the organization. So bring together your data team, your business users, your legal team, your compliance team, your chief security officer. Get all of them in a room to agree on, as a company, we know we have to transform, or as an organization, we have to transform. We have to take advantage of this innovation, or the competition will leave us behind. And how much appetite do we have, and what aspects of our business to actually start to leverage this capability and technology?
And there's a lot of discussion going on around like the AI is as smart as the data that is being fed into the system. Plus, there's also information like there's also like the inherent challenges that you spoke about, right? Like biases, then there's hallucinations that AI can go through, and AI is used by by cyber criminals. They're even used by cybersecurity experts to defend their attack surface areas. So, how is Databricks helps organizations to lower the risks of AI?
Yeah, I think what I essentially how we have approached it is the data intelligence platform, which really is bridging the gap between your data and your AI. I think most people know us very well for the Lakehouse, which was sort of combining your warehouse data with your unstructured data in the lake to be able to run AI and BI across those data sets.
Mm-hmm.
About 2 years ago, we did the acquisition of Mosaic ML that is now completely integrated into the platform. So if I think about things like how do you actually do things like ML ops or LLM operations, right, to be able to take like a DevOps approach
Mm-hmm.
to AI, that that very capability has been built on our platform and being able to do that. So everything, like I mentioned, because Unity Catalog is such an integral, I almost call it like the brain of the platform, right? So it can do things like give you that end-to-end lineage so that when a regulator comes to you and says, what data did you use to create that AI product that you're now selling to customers? You can go back and show what data did you use to train the model? What model did you use? What were the weights that you put behind that? Right? What products did it then feed into? And so I think for many, it is at least for us at Databricks, it really has been about how do we simplify that end to end as much as possible? Because it was so fascinating. I think when ChatGPT came out, everybody said everybody's going to be a prompt engineer. That's all you're going to ever have to do is use these big open or these big proprietary models, and you'll be able to solve any problem. Problem is, most organizations didn't want to expose their proprietary information, right? Their IP. They didn't want to actually put out into those systems. And so then we started to think about retrieval augmentation or RAG approaches, like how can you right narrow down the scope. I don't care about every lyrics to a Beatles song if I'm trying to solve my organizational go-to-market strategy for Middle East, right? And so we started to think about how can we create platforms that allow for that. Then we started talking compound sort of systems and agentic systems. I think right now, every event I go to, everybody wants to talk about agents.
Yeah.
I think anybody who thinks that they're going to create a single agent to solve all business problems is still in that relatively novel part of it. I think most organizations are realizing it's not going to take just one agent, it's going to take multiple agents, and it's going to take compound agents working together
Mhm.
to be able to do this. So now we're really starting to think about things like judging and governance across those things and how do you model that. So our approach is really thinking about how do we make sure that the platform can support that, and as the evolution continues to happen, how do you make sure that the platform's open enough to take in a net new llama model or whatever might be coming from whatever direction, or like allow organizations to write their own models? Can we make sure that the platform can support that? Because like I mentioned earlier, you can't rebuild your entire tech stack every time those things happen. The other thing is we're trying to figure out how to make the platform smarter itself to be able to help with some of those things, because what you really need with AI is things like business semantics. For example, if I say employee at Databricks, it's very different than potentially employee at Microsoft or employee at TechDogs, right? Like we're going to have different definitions
Mhm.
of things like employee, of customer, of fiscal year, of revenue definitions. And so how do we use things like intelligence inside the platform to help organizations start to do some of this master data management? Because we can tell based on what tables get used, what reports and dashboards are being used, where do we actually see things feeding into other products. We can start to actually aggregate that together in a way that allows organizations, I think, to move on that data quality issue faster. And so it's super exciting. It's moving really, really fast. Maybe the one other thing I'll mention is one of the things that we just announced in June was this concept of agent bricks, because
Mhm.
everybody is looking to build agents, but there's very common patterns, things like summarization, things like retrieval, document retrieval. So there's some very, very common patterns that organizations are looking at when they're thinking about these compound agent systems. And so we are starting to think about what of those pieces can we build as part of the platform that then organizations can focus on the logic or the other parts of the agents that need to go around that. And can we make sure that we're investing some of our research team, et cetera, to make sure that you have, for summarization, you have the best model that exists, you have the capability, you have insight into how it's performing, you can perform judgment across it, et cetera. And so really, really exciting to see some of that evolution. And I think we'll continue to see that happen as we go into the future.
So, Robin, we've spoken about leadership, we've spoken about frameworks, we've spoken about governance. Now, I want to zoom out a little bit and focus on the leadership side, right? Because none of this transformation that we spoke about will not be successful without a strong leadership, right? And like as you've already spoken about, right, it's 10% about the tech, 90% it's about people and processes, right? So in your view, how can business leaders balance people, processes, and technology when driving meaningful change across the organizations?
I think the approach I have always taken is people first, right? Like you really just have to understand um, what are you asking for them? Are you
Mm-hmm.
driving some level of clarity for the organization? Do they understand the why they have to change in the first place? Regardless of what change management model that you look to apply, every single one of them requires an understanding of the personas across the organization that you're looking to enable or empower in some way. And so for me, I always feel like if you start with people, the process and the technology will sort of uh, follow. That's not to say that you don't have to think about processes or build the platform. You do, but I think if you take a people centric approach to that,
Mm-hmm.
you will find that you're able to move at a pace that if you start with technology or process, I find that you can't. And so for many organizations, the conversations I have at the very beginning is how do we think about how your organization is structured today? How do we think about the personas that exist within the organization? Where is their current data and AI maturity, and what are their capabilities? And then aspirationally, what do we as an organization, where do we want them to be? And now let's partner together to figure out how are we going to get them from where they are today to where they think they have to be. How do we make sure that we have things like feedback loops set up in place? Just like agile
Mm-hmm.
approach to engineering, you have to have an agile approach to the people as you go through these types of changes and transformations. And so I think the organizations that do this really well are they drive clarity, and then they make sure that they have a way for the organization to give feedback on what's working, what's not working. This process doesn't work. This technology or this data product is missing this capability or this competency. I'm not saying like be an order taker. I think those teams that essentially say, yes, we'll take a backlog of every time somebody comes to us to say the point A on dashboard 75 needs to be blue instead of red. Those are not the teams that are really transforming, but those that come and have such a good connection in with the business, and you have clarity on what is that value you're looking to drive, what's the business impact you're looking to drive, and how are the data and AI products that you're creating driving that, and the business can actually give you feedback on right. We needed to transform the manufacturing line 75 in Des Moines, Iowa, because of this insight, and or it's not working for this location because of GDPR or whatever it might be. Like making sure that we have that capability to really iterate, but you have to move fast and put people at sort of the center of that. What are they looking to achieve? What are the metrics that they care about? How do you make sure that you can some measurable value around the data strategy that you're looking to execute? And I think any leader that starts with that, starts with their people first, you're setting yourself up for success.
I love the people first approach, but there's a lot of dilemma that's going on in the workforce. And leadership conversations are going on around the same, that will AI replace humans, right? And that's a huge, and that's one of the biggest factors I believe that is creating resistance from the workforce from using AI. And plus, it becomes difficult for the change management as well. To take place across the organization. So, what's your take on this dilemma, and how should enterprises, leaders, and the workforce take this ahead?
Yeah, I was just reading an interesting article yesterday actually about our big tech employees actually training the AI that's going to take their jobs, right? Because there's such a big focus on engineering and development. My perspective is that to me this is very similar to the Industrial Revolution or anywhere where we've completely transformed the way that we've always approached it. I'm sure at the same time every employee that had a manual sort of role that was going to be replaced by a machine felt exactly the same way. Um, but if you look at it, it wasn't necessarily displacement. It was thinking about if you put a people first approach on it, what are the functions or the processes that they will no longer have to do if it's not turning a screwdriver or it's not. Let me give a great example. I love manufacturing because I think they just have great examples. So on
Mhm,
a manufacturing plant floor, if you think about some of the phenomenal talent that has been doing a specific like QC function for 50
mhm,
years, they have enough tribal knowledge in their head that they can hear the squeak of a machine and realize that it's not up to par. Am I going to be able to create an AI solution to completely displace that? No, probably
mhm,
not. But what I can do is create an AI solution that instead of waiting till the very end of the supply chain to
mhm,
have a singular person identify that we have a quality issue, can I
mhm,
build AI into some of the quality checks earlier in the supply chain so that my tribal capabilities or knowledge at the end of the supply chain is only dealing with sort of the outliers or the things that got through on the where we could pull out quality issues much earlier in the process and save us some level of manufacturing. I mean, it would be so much nicer if we could throw away the product or recycle the product earlier in the manufacturing process as opposed to waiting till the final step. And so for me, it's more about right, similar to the Industrial Revolution. How do we help bring people along on the journey by thinking about what is the thing that we want them to do for the company? What is the mission of the organization, and have they bought into that? And then how are we thinking about how we're going to enable them differently? Right, inside of Databricks, we definitely do a lot with sort of leveraging our own tools and products and systems as well as that of our partners like Lean and Perplexity, et cetera, because it can actually improve productivity. Does that mean that they're going to replace me with AI? I would like to think not, because there's some level of connectivity and people and communication and those things that are very different than an AI machine. Does that mean my job changes, that I'm not spending 12 hours a week trying to research a specific issue or identify a new strategic approach to go solve for a specific problem? I definitely see my time is changing. So now the question is, as you look across your organization, what are the roles that are going to be impacted, that are going to have to change, and how are we thinking about that today to help ensure that we're giving people the right stepping stones? I think I worked with a chief data officer at WPP, and she used to say, look, your job isn't going to be replaced by AI. It's going to be replaced by people who know how to use
To you.
AI to do that job more effectively. And I absolutely think that's true. Do I think some roles will go away completely? Probably. But how do we make sure that we're helping those people go through that transition now? Where are they passionate about? What is that mission of the organization that they want to accomplish for? And are there other roles or functions that they can fulfill where they're AI enabled or empowered to be able to still drive that value? Because I think people sometimes discount the knowledge and understanding that you have about the business is irreplaceable, right? The things that you can do, the understanding that you have about the system, the processes, the politics, all of those things that have to come together to make an org that can never be replaced by AI. I think that's where we need to focus, is making sure that we're taking people along on the journey, that it's not oh, your job is gone today because we've decided to put an agent in your place. And I think these people who say that the company will exist entirely of agents and you'll just have managers of agents, I worry about those as well. I mean, I think right now we've seen some of those tests where, one of the agents tries to blackmail an employee, or another agent, right, tries to take over the company. So I think we're a long way from completely displacing entire companies with AI agents. But I think anybody who is worried about it should really think about, where is there an opportunity for you to learn something new, or where is that unique value proposition that you can come back to say, with AI, I can do all these other things that I could never do before because I was so stuck in right doing VLOOKUPs in Excel that I could never get out of my own way. And so I think there's lots and lots of opportunity there.
Definitely, the workforce is shifting and the way we work is shifting. And, the industrial revolution you spoke about, it's also happening right now as well, but we're moving into 5.0, wherein, we're exploring cobots, where, humans and machines could work together seamlessly to ensure the business outcomes are achieved, and they're achieved at a faster, like much faster and much efficient, so that, we grow as a humankind together towards one direction and making our lives much better. And when I research about your profile, Robin, you have led in some of the very high pressure, high change environments right till now. And what are some of the leadership traits you value the most, especially in high growth and high stake environment?
Yeah, I think that hyperscale growth is super interesting. I've been fortunate to be with some companies. I mean, if we look at how fast Databricks is growing, or when I was at Microsoft, some of those teams were just exponentially significant growth in a short period of time. I think there's sort of two things I always look for. One is, leaders that provide clarity, right? I think the
Mm-hmm.
hardest thing when you're going through that type of hyperscale growth is not understand what is the mission, what's the vision, what are we trying to achieve, and it can be fairly broad. Let me maybe give you that Microsoft example again. I think one of the things that Satya did really well was when he came in as CEO, he realized a PC on every desktop was not a mission that the company still needed to gravitate around, right? Everybody had PCs. That wasn't our goal and objective. So when he changed the mission of Microsoft to be empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more, that was really something that the organization could gravitate toward. And so as think about my data roles in the last half of my career at Microsoft, it was all about how do I make sure that recommendations that I'm making around change management, or process change, or organizational change, is it helping the company deliver against that mission? And if not, then it really helped us prioritize. But that clarity from the leadership was absolutely critical. At Databricks, our mission is to solve the world's toughest data problems. And so if I think about what I see our HR teams doing, or the great talent that we're hiring as we continue to go through this hyperscale growth, it's all about helping organizations solve for those super tough problems that we haven't been able to solve before. So do we have the technology? Are we giving the right enablement? Are we helping companies and partnering with them in a way that allows them to do that? And I think those companies that have leaders from the very top down that are really articulating that mission and why we exist and why we function and what we're trying to achieve, you have to have that clarity, particularly knowing that what I use today to do that will be very different than what I use tomorrow to do that. But as long as I understand what the outcome needs to be, then we need to sort of have that. And I think the other thing that I really appreciate is transparency. Um, I don't know if people know this, but at Databricks every week we have an all hands with the CEO, and a part of that
Mm-hmm.
agenda is always like an ask me anything. So you literally can ask any question to Ali Gadzia, our CEO, and I think for me that has just been a complete a completely different sort of culture that exists inside the environment, because there is this level of transparency and trust that exists, which makes it a safe space to test and iterate and be innovative and feel like you have that support. So I think leaders that can create that safe environment and they have that clarity on the overall goals and objectives that they're trying to create are driving some phenomenal cultural shifts across the ecosystem.
I really like the mission, like solving world's toughest data problems. I believe because, data has been created at a very rapid scale today. And the more, sorted or structured data that we have, much better the AI agents would be, and much better business outcomes, or whatever we want to achieve through these machines we'll be able to achieve. So now that we have covered your journey, enterprise AI strategies, and what leadership can do in such high stake environments, before we let you go today from this episode, Robin, we would like to for our audience to know the personal side of you beyond the chief data officer role, right? So this section is the rapid fire section where I'll ask you quick questions. You can give as candid answers as you can. When you're ready, I'll be more than happy to shoot them at you.
Sounds great. I'm ready.
Perfect. If you had a full day with no meetings or email, how would you spend it?
Sleeping probably. Yeah.
Mountains or beaches? What's your quick escape from your?
I love both. That's why I live in Seattle. I'm an hour either way. I can get to the mountains or to the ocean.
That's great. Sneakers or formal shoes? What's your vibe?
Sneakers, absolutely.
Coffee, tea, or something else that you?
Coffee. I think I have a drip to my Nespresso machine going at this point.
Last show you couldn't stop watching, or a movie that you've rewatched multiple times.
Firefly. That's one of my favorite shows of all time.
If you could instantly swap careers with anyone for a day, who it would be?
I would actually probably swap with somebody like a carpenter, right? Something that's sort of artistic. I can use my hands, but it still
Mhm.
requires some thought, and you have something tangible at the end.
If not tech, what would you be doing?
I actually wanted to be an artist. I would have done oil painting.
Any dream vacation or place that's on your bucket list?
My bucket list still remains. So I traveled 320 days last year for work. So I have been almost everywhere in the world. Two places I would love to go: Sydney and Cape Town.
That's really nice. 325 days, only 40 days you got to spend at your home. That's a that's a wild travel. So thank you so much, Robin, for joining us today and sharing us your insights, your journey, and what leadership could do in such an rapidly evolving pace. Uh, any parting words you would leave our audience with?
Yeah, I think I would just tell the audience it's super exciting times. I know things seem to be moving at us at a really quick pace, but with that comes such an opportunity. So don't forget your superpower and how you can actually apply that, because I think technology is going to be there for you to be able to deliver. So really excited to see what the audience can create when they have great tech and people and process to support it.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and stories with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on YouTube, Instagram, or your favorite podcast app. Catch past episodes and more at techdogs.com. See you next time.